Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of the My School Adventure podcast. This week it's a me episode because my guest unfortunately couldn't make it to record on time and she'll be on next week. So, since we've been exploring some healthy fundraising options in the last few episodes and some innovative school ideas with sensory aids, I thought I would tell you about my experiences with another healthy fundraising option: getting grants for schools and the best chances of securing one. So it's basically how to fundraise without selling anything because except an idea, I suppose. So since I ask my guests to introduce themselves when I start an episode, I'll introduce myself to you. So I'm a mum of three. And when my eldest started kindergarten, I wanted to be involved in his education. And so I became a member of his school's P&C. So one reason I was able to do that was because they offered free babysitting, and actually it was donated by the school out of hours childcare service. So if you don't have something like that running at your school, I suggest try and organise free babysitting because it really makes a huge impact on your parent body organisation if you can offer free babysitting. And this babysitting took care of my eldest and middle sons, and my baby daughter, I just brought her in with me until she was old enough to go into babysitting as well. So the first year I just watched, and then I became vice president and later secretary, and I held official roles for 3 or 4 years. I can't remember now because it was a while ago, but I was involved in a lot of fundraising at that time. I organised, or I helped organise, events at school, including lots of car boot sales, trivia nights, raffles, tulip bulbs in pots, school art shows, election day barbecues, cupcake sales. And I was also responsible for submitting and securing 3 grants for the school over a couple of years, resulting in $67,000 cash for 2 projects. So now, actually, my school adventure was the direct result of being a part of all this fundraising, because anyone who's volunteered on a school fundraising committee knows all the hard work that goes into it. And you end up working, I think we calculated once, it was for 10 cents an hour. So not begrudging the work, because I also made some really lovely friends and I like to contribute to the school. But it was a lot of work and people became burnt out. And after a while, I also became a bit jaded because a lot of our fundraisers weren't healthy, or they sold, plastic junk that was maybe used for at most an hour and then just went straight into landfill. And that didn't feel good for me morally. Or there were fundraisers that didn't have anything really to do with the students, or they weren't having a positive value for them, except very indirectly with the money raised kind of being distributed around the school. So a small portion was going to them. So I I wanted to do, I had thoughts to do something better. And it was actually after helping set up our annual school, or biannual, every 2 years, school art show, and the big parent fundraising night that we had, that I had the idea of writing the art show that came to life at Your School Name Here, and creating novels that were customizable for schools, because my kids love their school and they love talking about their school and they love talking about their teachers and they love talking about their friends, and pretty much that's all they talked about all the time. So I thought that a book would be reading, and that's aligned with their education. And after the very exhausting process of organising and then bumping in the school art show into a beautiful heritage building, which is quite a task, I was eager to do something that was easy. And there was another thing too, because one of my children has anaphylaxis. And if you don't know what anaphylaxis is, it's a life-threatening food allergy to traces of that food. So you have to be really careful not to have any cross-contamination or possible traces. And it's very socially restrictive. So anytime the school had a cupcake stall or a barbecue, which is quite often, my child wasn't able to eat. They weren't able to participate. They actually felt very scared and very excluded because they would have to withdraw themselves, or I would have to physically withdraw them. And it was really upsetting for them. It was a range of different emotions, from, as I said, scared to just upset. There'd be meltdowns at home when they could hold it together at school. And there was a lot of just gently trying to divert their attention from cupcake stalls, on weekends, on Fridays. And that was very sad for them, especially when they were young. They managed to develop a bit more of an emotional hardness about it as they've gotten older. And I say they because it's my children's personal health issues. So I don't want to identify which one of them is to the whole world on this podcast. But so I had that idea for a book fundraiser, and as a side positive, I realized pretty soon after that not only reading is a good thing, but that a book fundraiser includes everybody. So no matter your dietary restrictions, whether it's from a health point of view, a religious point of view, or any disabilities that you have, everybody is at school to read, to learn to read. And by the way, if you do order a set of My School Adventure books for your school and you have a student with a visual impairment, just let me know, because I can make a special copy for them, either as a PDF or in large print. So they can, I want everybody to read, and I don't want anyone to be left out. So do let me know. I can help, I hope. So back to grants. As I said earlier, I secured 3 grants totaling $67,000 over a couple of years, I think about 2.5. And I thought I'd share my lessons from these grants to help you get fundraising for free. So why should you try a grant? Why should you try one? They're a gamble. There are lots of forms to fill out. There are obligations to fulfill, after the grant money is given to you, and you probably won't win. So it sounds like a negative, doesn't it? But it's actually not so hard and not so difficult. Here's why you'd want to try and get a grant. Your school's community might be sales tired, right? How many times a year do you ask them to put their hands in their pockets to pay for something that they might not really, want, that product? You might want to try for a grant application because it can be the best financial return per hour of volunteer work that you can possibly do. You can secure funds from outside your school community, from external organizations. And parents who can't be a part of regular fundraisers because they have odd or very full-time work hours, but want to contribute, can do this on their own time. So having a grant person gets you extra volunteers. Here's when you'd want to have grant applications happening. When your school has identified a project that they want to get done but can't afford. Now this way you have a very specific idea in mind, and it's probably itemized down to the last, pencil and band-aid. You'd want to apply for a grant when your school has deductible gift recipient status, because there are more grants available to DGR organisations. But they're not all for DGR, so you can still get grants if you don't have DGR status. But if you do have it, you have more options. You'd want to apply for a grant when the grant outcome is based on local voting or local decision makers, because you have more chances of winning. And you'd want to apply for a grant when you can meet the decision makers of the grant, especially if you can bring them on site. But even a phone call is a help. So just quickly, in case you have no idea what a deductible gift recipient status is, in Australia, a DGR, deductible gift recipient, it's a special tax status that can allow your school or school parent group to collect donations and give tax-deductible receipts in return. Now, when a grant application is not going to work, and when you probably shouldn't apply for a grant, is when you're trying to make the application fit the grant category when it doesn't. So don't try. And that's the point of knowing, if you have a specific project in mind already, you'll know exactly whether it fits or not. And again, if you don't have a very specific goal or project in mind, don't go for the grant application. They are looking for people who are passionate and committed and are going to push something through. And if you're at the very beginning of that process, then you're not far enough along to apply for the grant. And don't apply if you're doing it in a hurry, because there are, or there can be, a lot of things that you need to do. You may need to get quotes from contractors, building contractors. You need to get the grant signed off perhaps by the principal. The principal might need permission from higher up. So it can't always be done in a hurry. But that's why I talk each week about possible grants your school could apply for, because even though it's not guaranteed by any means, and that's why schools do regular fundraisers, but with little work, a grant could be a big sweetener in your school's funding pot. So who do you want to organise the grant application for you? You want to have someone who's passionate about the school and passionate about getting the grant. And one person is fine, maybe also using the P&C president as a sounding board. Teams of 2 people are okay, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend a whole committee, as time is often of the essence. Basically, one person, I think 1 or 2 people are better at typing up a document. You'll need to get the permission of the principal or head teacher if you're in the UK, and you'll need to get their permission sought and secured before you submit a grant application, even if it's only your P&C who's applying for the grant and not the school per se, because your P&C is representing the school and the funds will be applied at the school, so the principal's permission is required. And the principal's input into the application may also be required, somewhere between, well, 0 to a lot. So as I said before, they'll often have to sign the application. So time needs to be allowed to let them read and amend it. And as I said too, they may have to refer it to somebody higher up. You also need to get someone who is articulate in their ideas and their writing, someone who's organised in being able to get quotes from contractors if needed, or I don't know, perhaps opinions from other people, and someone who's good at spelling and grammar, because you do need to make your message clear. And if your message has spelling and grammatical errors, it is not convincing. But that last one, you can just outsource that to another parent who is better at spelling and grammar. But it does need to be checked. So grants are monies given by local, state or federal government, large businesses, usually banks or insurance companies, or philanthropic organisations. And this money is to be spent on a specific purpose. So you can find grants everywhere. You can find them by searching online, subscribing to company newsletters or grants newsletters. You can read your local newspaper for competitions. You can listen to podcasts. So grants can either be allocated by competition, which is how we mainly think about them, or they can be allocated by entitlement. For example, local councils, at least in my area, offer small grants to any school in the council area for a water tank or a vegetable garden. So you don't always have to compete for a grant. You can search grant directories such as Grants Online for the UK, the Grants Hub or Grant Connect in Australia, or Foundation Directory Online in the USA, and these are all free directories. Or you can pay a subscription to access the Directory of Funders in Australia, or the Foundation Directory Online, which covers USA and the world. So I'll tell you how my grants went. Now, the first one I did was a competition that I found in my local newspaper, and it was $2,000 for community organisations, basically to spend however they wanted, had to be a positive benefit from memory. So I went to the principal and I said, oh, there's this competition, this grant, what do you want? You know, it's like $2,000. And she said, oh, we need some new home readers for the kindy to U2s. And I went, okay. So we were able to upload a video. So I created a little 3-minute video and I clearly stated why we needed them. And it was basically because the old readers were very dirty and torn, and kids basically didn't want to touch them. and children are required to take a book home every night to learn to read from kindergarten to year 2. So having tantalizing new books that were also up to date, because some of these books were quite old and the content wasn't so relevant. So they wanted to get books for all these reasons. Plus, we have a big multicultural, we had, because I've changed schools, a big multicultural population in our school. So a lot of these kids, because their parents were migrants, they didn't have, like I do. I mean, this is just one of my bookshelves. I have like bunches of childhood books that my children can easily access to read. But if you're moving from another country, you don't bring, you know, half a ton of books with you. So it was really important to have books available for these kids that they could easily, you know, take home every day. So I submitted it. I loaded up to the website, and it was a voting-based competition. And basically what we did was we told everybody, I think I was secretary at the time, maybe, we did an email out to our mailing list of everyone on the P&C. It went into the school newsletter. It was announced at assemblies, chatted, you know, in the playground. And because the competition was vote-based, we told everybody to get on the email link and vote for us. And word of mouth was fantastic. We marketed this as being the fundraiser that you didn't have to pay for and didn't have to bake a cupcake for. And when the competition, the newspaper lady rang me up to say that we had won, she said that we'd won by a landslide. So that was very exciting. We got the $2,000 check. It bought, I think, around 600 or 650 books for the school, which was a really big impact. And this isn't one, I don't know if you can see this. This isn't exactly one, but they're these tiny, you know, these kind of small books that have a picture and a little bit of writing, and they get more complicated as, you know, the kids get better at reading. But basically 600 of those, or 650, came to the school and filled out the book requirements from kindy to year 2. So I was really pleased to be able to do that. The parents were really happy as well. And yeah, the school was grateful as well, and it was easy. So for $2,000, I think I had to write a speech. I had to, like, a 3-minute speech for the video. I recorded the video. I edited the video. It probably took at the most 4 or 5 hours by one person receiving $2,000. So that was very well worth it. Okay, now I'm just going to take a drink of coffee because my throat's getting dry. Okay, now the second grant I won was $50,000. And it was, well, actually, it was for a community grant for our state electorate that was for $200,000 in total. Now, not that we would get 200,000, but that's just how much they had to share. And the decision makers, which were the state MP plus a few other people in government departments, I think they had about 4 or 5 people, they would decide whether to give it all to one person or split it amongst many. So I went again to our principal and I asked her, well, there's this grant, what would you like doing? And she said, oh, you know, the backfield, we called it, the grass playing area. It's really dry, and the grass, there's no grass on it basically, and the sand is just dirt, and kids fall over all the time, and they really hurt themselves much more than they would if they had a field with lots of juicy grass growing on it, basically. Because there was no water, because the school has to pay for water, and if they paid for water, they couldn't pay for more essential things like books or, you know, electronic whiteboards or computers. So water for the grass was low priority on the budget list. So we discussed that getting a couple of water tanks or a big water tank and putting in subsurface irrigation, so pipes underneath, and leveling out the field because it had lots of lumps in it and holes would be a great project. So before I started on the application, I booked a meeting with the local MP, who, as I said, was one of the decision makers. And I prepared some documentation. I took some photos. I wrote up, you know, a process, and I very nervously actually went along to his office, and there was another like one of his workers there as well. So I was quite nervous, but I started talking about why, we would like to get this grant, and is it the kind of thing that they were looking for, or that would fit their category to sponsor, and how much money would we get possibly for it. So we had a discussion that yes, it was in the ballpark of what they were looking for, and it was a worthy idea, and it would help a lot of people with kids, and that they could allocate about $65,000 to it, if out of the 200,000, assuming we went ahead and did all the application and won that. So I was okay, great. I'll get it as a budget for 65,000. So anyway, there was quite a lot of work involved in this one. I probably spent, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 hours at least on it, and then it took a couple of months to come back. And then I wasn't actually there when they announced that we had won it, but we had only won $50,000 instead of the $65,000. So I was actually quite furious about this, because we didn't have enough money to proceed with the project. And, they'd indicated that we would get $65,000. And literally, without that extra 15,000, the backfield would have been just pipes and kids and no dirt. Like, there wasn't money for dirt. We had pared it down, like, the ground by centimeters to try and fit that budget. Like, we just had the minimum soil, the minimum, kilos of grass seed on it. It was really the minimum we could pair it to. We couldn't pair it anymore. So I was quite cranky about that. So if I hadn't been cranky, I probably wouldn't have done the next thing, which was ring up my local council. So the $50,000 grant was with the state government. So I just rang up the local council, and I booked a meeting with the mayor, and I went up the next day to see him. And I told him what had happened, that we had won $50,000 to do these irrigation works, but it was basically useless because it indicated 65. We were $15,000 short. What could they do for me? And I was very surprised. The mayor said, "Oh, we'll pay the $15,000." And apparently the mayor had a discretionary fund that he could allocate funds to for things that he thought were good. So I said, "Fabulous, thank you very much. It's the cheapest $15,000 you'll spend to kick off a $65,000, value project." So for that $15,000 grant, it took probably six hours, I think, tops, which was including the meeting with him at the council chambers, including getting him to come down to the school for 10 minutes and having a look at the field and the kids. And also I had to turn up to a council meeting, one of those public monthly meetings, and make a little speech. And I brought my kids along for that as well, so they would understand local government proceedings. and that was it. In fact, it was probably like 3 hours. It was very little time, and I got $15,000 for it. So, that was lucky, but that's how I got my grants. So the lessons that I learned from these grants are, from the first grant, the newspaper one, I found out that local grants are easier. One, because it limits the number of competitors that are going for the grant money to just your local area. And also, in terms of voting grants are great, because if you work hard, you can persuade more people to vote for you. It's also very important to really clearly identify what your project is and why you need it funded. Okay. Also, what I learned from grant one was that even though you're one person writing the grant, you do need your whole of school community support to promote the grant. And I had one mum in particular who was fabulous at getting people to sign up for that. So now with the second grant, what I learned was, because of the amount of work that would be involved in writing up this grant application, a pre-meeting before I started writing it up with the grantor was a good idea and worthwhile to see if it was going to float at all. Now, it had the serendipitous outcome that one of the judges on the decision-making panel was now acquainted with our project just a little bit. Now, when I went to have the meeting with the MP, I didn't realize that he was going to be one of the judges. But the side effect was that he understood what I was talking about, because we were actually talking rather than it just being written down on paper. And I was able to transmit some of the emotion and the need for it. So that was very effective, that person-to-person time. And the second lesson I learned from the second grant, the $50,000 one, was that they didn't give the money that they indicated would be available. So you might need to factor that in when you're seeking grants for projects, that you might not get the whole of the prize pool. Now, the lesson that I learned from the third grant was, don't give up. You have to keep approaching people in person. You have to show them the project on location if you can, or at least speak to them by phone. And if you can get them to meet the people that they'll be helping, or their money will be helping, that's even better. You need to point out the advantages both to the people who are being helped and to them. And you have to keep saying thank you over and over and over again. So when you do get a grant, you say thank you in person, by letter to their organization. You invite them to your assembly to thank them in front of the whole school. You organize a press release with your local newspaper. You show up and be a part of their newsletter if they have one, and more and more. Like, you need to thank them over and over, because they're giving you a lot of money to help. So, in summary, you need to investigate grants and take note of application closing dates and what types of projects that they're looking to sponsor. So grants, sometimes they're posted suddenly and you don't have much time, but often they're posted 6 months to maybe even 1 year for the very, very large grants for capital works in particular. So you need to, if you know what you're looking for, schedule these into your calendar so you don't forget and you can start preparing early. So check your school community connections for grant opportunities. Some large corporations only offer grants to groups associated with their employees. And if you if you have a parent who has one of these companies that give grants like this, it can actually make it easier for you to win them, because again, the competition is reduced and they've determined that they are going to allocate this money anyway. So allocate 1 or 2 people to prepare the documentation for each grant, and allow at least 2 to 3 months to get the documentation ready and approved by your school principal for submission. People have lives as well, you know, hiccups, health problems, so it can't always be done instantly. Make sure you stick to the grant's guidelines and clearly identify your project outcomes. If you don't answer every question, or your project is outside their scope, you're not going to succeed. So really essential to proofread for spelling, grammar and punctuation, as well as message fluency. And where possible, meet the judges in person to discuss how your project fits the grant guidelines and the impact the success of winning the grant will have for your school. If you can't meet them in person, try and contact them by phone. At least it will be in their head and you'll have an idea of how suitable you are. Invite them on a tour of your school to see where the project will fit in, and be polite and helpful. Do not push for commitment. Just show them around. You're a guide. Okay, so I hope that gave you some idea about grants and not to be fearful from them. Keep listening each week and I'll be letting you know about new ones that I find out. about. And maybe you will hear of a grant that really suits your project or your school. And with a little bit of application and luck, maybe you can win. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the My School Adventure podcast. And join us next week as I interview Tammy Anderson from Briar Road Public School about community engagement and the Stronger, Smarter Schools program. See you then.